let's do it. So how long has it been now? It's been like a year and a half. Holy crap! This is like a comeback for Hank. I don't know how to do this.
All
right, we're like the Jack.
I was never gone.
Yeah, how about it? Okay. Well, welcome guys to the podcast. Joseph Johnson with Ultimate Athlete Concepts, joined by Jeff Moyer from DC Sports Training, and our author, friend, and guest, Henk Kreinhoff. Hank, thanks for taking the time out to talk to us again today. It's been a while.
Yeah.
And very excited to talk to you. So since the last time we talked, we were, we had not even, I don't think we had released the speed book yet. And so that was kind of, we were talking about it coming out, but it had not happened yet, I don't think. Very big success. Sold really well. It's been very well received. I've gotten lots of great feedback on it, which then begs the question, when is the next one coming out? Or what is Hank writing something else? And I'm happy to let everybody know the answer is yes. Hank is writing another book, and yes, I think it's going to be better than the first one. And yes, I'm excited. Absolutely. It might be the most excited I've been in a while, because I think that from that platform that you set with the book to kind of set the table, because a lot of people maybe didn't understand conceptually like where you might be coming from, especially, with your background. Everybody didn't know the details of that. And so now with this next one, we're going to be able to talk about, how to, the practical side, like what your thoughts are on different types of training. And what I love about what you and I just were talking about earlier was that you're saying this is how to do that. This is how to use those things. This is where they fit in the scheme of things, and not just, touch on them in a philosophical way, but talk about them in a very practical way, which is, I think that obviously that's what people need. They need something that they can use. So with that, saying that, a couple of questions came to my mind after reading the last book, and I'd love to kind of just pick your brain on these a little bit. It doesn't get a lot of talk. So you touched on eccentric training in the book, and didn't go into a lot of detail, because obviously that's kind of forthcoming with the book that you're writing right now. And when I thought about it, I realized, there's multiple forms of eccentric training, all which will have different application. So what came to my mind, and please expand on this, Hank, because I'm only going on what I know limited with this, that some eccentrics, people will use as a slow, what we call slow eccentric, or a yielding, just lowering the resistance, real slow to enhance that eccentric contraction. Or they may do something like an altitude drop, where they're coming from a high height, landing, and they get that real sharp, quick eccentric action, lengthening of the musculature. And then lastly, the super maximal ones, as we know, eccentric strength is somewhere around 130% or so, or maybe a little more of the concentric. And so the athlete might be lowering a resistance or a weight that is more than they could lift concentrically, all which have different effects. Could you talk about that? And if there's another version too, I'd love to hear about that. Could you talk about what's going on with each one of them, and how you would use them, and the scenarios you would use them in?
It's a little bit more complex than most people think. The first one is that people confuse eccentric contraction with eccentric training. But an eccentric contraction doesn't mean eccentric training. It just means lowering things, or the distance between the insertion becomes longer. But it doesn't mean it's an eccentric training. What we're basically looking at is a load that is above the 1 RM. So if you can lift concentrically, 200 pounds, then lowering 200 pounds isn't eccentric training. It's an eccentric contraction, but it's not eccentric training. This is the problem. So you need always above 100%. Now, when you're working above 100%, normally when you go into the weight room, it's going to be heavy, and heavy means basically slow. And that means eccentric strength training, like in bodybuilding, negative reps, a spotter is in bench press. You lift it with a spotter, and then the spotter takes his hands off, and bench press, you lower it by yourself. You can't push it up anymore. So that's eccentric training. how does this translate to what you're going to do on the track or in the field? How does this translate to, for instance, shot put? This is the problem. Whatever you do in the weight room, if it's concentric, eccentric, it's always heavier and slower than what you do out in the field. So what is the transfer of that? It's exactly the same like in other in cleans or snatches or squats concentrically. The problem is the problem of transfer. And when you see eccentric loads, it could be kind of slow. For instance, if you release a grip in judo or wrestling, and you're going against somebody, okay, that's eccentric. It's rather slow. But the touchdown in the sprinting, some muscles work eccentrically there, or the famous notorious hamstring muscle work eccentrically, but at a much higher velocity. So the problem is, how can you get an eccentric overload in such a short time? And that's pretty hard to do. And so this is this is our quest. So what we do in eccentric training, first we build a base of raw eccentric strength, general strength, how you want to call it, maximum strength. Just the heavy weights and lower it in 4 seconds, or in leg press, push out with 2 legs, and then release 1 leg and let it come down easily in 4 seconds. So heavy that you cannot push it with 1 leg, because then again it's not eccentric overload. That was the old idea, and it worked very well. Well, if you were a 15-year-old beginning athlete working out 3 times a week, then probably there are other priorities than working on your eccentric strength. Eccentric strength is pretty demanding in mechanical sense. There's a lot of tension, a lot of force demand on the muscle and on the tendon tissue and on the fascia and so on and so on. So a good eccentric training, you might be sore for 2 days because there's real muscle damage in there. It has been tested by people in the 1980s. So you take a high building and you walk up the stairs concentrically, and then you take the elevator down. And in the end, you take biopsies before and after. Or you take the elevator up and walk down. And then you do this a couple of times, back to back. So walking down the stairs eccentrically, then you take biopsies again and see the muscle damage in there. You see the inflammation process, you see disruption of muscle fibers at the Z-line and so on and so on. So we know pretty well what eccentric training does. What it is, there's not much new. But then came the new wave of equipment, and part of the equipment is isoinertial. The Versa pulley was there. The yo-yo was there. The yo-yo was the first original eccentric flywheel invented by Per Tesch and Hans Berg. Hans Berg is an orthopedic surgeon, and Per Tesch is an exercise physiologist, both from Stockholm in Sweden. And they came up with this yo-yo principle. And that became, as a matter of fact, a big hit until people, I must admit, especially anywhere, started to think the same old idea. The heavier, the better. So they started with, very high velocity, and then you pull down and resist it, and the only thing you create is muscle soreness, and basically nothing else, no real effect. You have to be smart. It basically applies to all the trainers. You have to be smart with it, and you say, oh, this is eccentric. Wow, eccentric overload. The heavier, the better. That's not it. You demand some periodization in it as well, in the eccentric training, of course, like you do in normal training. And most people got that wrong. This is the big problem. So you have to make sure that there's a transfer from the normal eccentric load, 2 legs up, 1 leg down. And you can do it yourself. You can have a machine to help you. You can have a machine to pull you down, but it's all slow and non-specific. Then you have the faster speeds and the transition from concentric, eccentric, and eccentric, concentric in the yo-yo machine, because the transition is very important too, from eccentric to concentric. That's where part of the secret is of the stretch shortening cycle. In in those machines you can have a very smooth transition from eccentric to concentric, or from concentric to eccentric, or you can have a sharp transition. That makes a difference too. And normally we have a sharp transition. Eccentric coming down, contact time, and then immediately after, as fast as possible, you don't want to go down too deep when you land a concentric transition. This transition is very important. And well, I was looking for sprinters, and whatever you do, the famous eccentric hamstring curls or the Nordic hamstring curls, they're all too slow. They're all too non-specific in any aspect. So I was looking for exercises that gave us an eccentric overload at a higher velocity. Well, the only really specific exercise, of course, is sprinting at full speed. But we also found something else that is a new topic of research for us. It's basically working with wearable resistance, where you can load a limb or a lower limb or a thigh or a calf or an arm or a lower underarm. You can load it with light weights, and this way you also get a stronger eccentric component in there. There are concentric as eccentric component. You can make it very specifically. You move at very high speed, moving very specifically, and still get an eccentric overload. So that's the topic of the work I'm doing right now, working with this system. So it's yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. It's just so. It's easy to do eccentric work. Just lower something. That's not sufficient. It's easy to do slow eccentric work, which is general, and there's a long way to transfer it to what happens in competition. And of course, there's the fast eccentric work, more specific, and that's pretty hard to accomplish, as a matter of fact.
So would you say, altitude drops kind of were on the fringe, like you didn't see it very much, even when people talk context of depth jumps and other plyos and stuff. You didn't see much of a conversation about altitude drops. And from what I read, and you correct me wherever I'm wrong here, that they would go, that they experimented with them up to maybe 8 feet, where they in the air and have the athlete jump, land, and try to land in the not collapse, but land in an upright position. Does that satisfy any of those requirements, or is that something that you kind of wouldn't even put into the training cycle?
Yeah, it's somewhere in between. It's not slow eccentric. It's fast eccentric because you have a short contact time. The touchdown time is long. You don't go down too deep. As a matter of fact, one of my mentors, Camilo Bosco, normally what you do if you do a drop jump, you land and you jump up as high as possible from a large knee angle. Let me say this.
Yeah.
What he did was jumping down all the way down to 90 degrees and then stop it right there and then jump. So a much more larger eccentric component, especially good for volleyball because it's specific for volleyball. It's not specific for sprinting. I mean, vertical jumps is not specific for sprinting. You don't go vertically, basically. It's two legs bilateral. The two legs work bilateral and not unilateral. And the contact time is a lot longer than in sprinting. So, yeah, I think that drop jumps from a pretty good height. The thing is that no one that I know tried to figure out what is the optimum height. You have to figure out what is the optimum height. Otherwise, there's a tremendous risk of injury or of tendon damage. And the other thing is, if you do a jump, a day has 24 hours. You jump. How many jumps should you do to have a little bit of, how you want to call it, compare with time under tension? Contact time is only 200, 300, 400 milliseconds. That's half a second over 24 hours. How many jumps do you have to do? Well, you say, well, then you do 100 jumps. That's fine. Try it. Because the thing is, the eccentric quality of your quads, for instance, or your calf muscle, they will improve. But the question is, what do your Achilles tendon and what do your foot muscles and especially bones and joints think of that, of doing that? So they have to absorb the shock. So in the end, drop jumps and a very powerful tool if done right. But it also carries a tremendous risk of injury, not in the short term, but especially in the long term. Because if you take 10 hurdles and you bound over 10 hurdles, it's nothing, you're not even tired. So you do a second set and a third set. Well, you're not going to get tired because the contact time is short. You've got enough time for recovery. You walk back and do another set.
Yeah.
You're not going to be punished. But when you do 5 sets, you should see the micro traumata or the micro fractures in bones, or the tremendous stress on the tendons, especially the Achilles tendon. So in the end, that's what's going to kill you. Not after we're doing this for 6 weeks or for doing this for 2 months, but if you do this for half a year, you'll see.
Yeah. So I guess my question would be, or the way I'm understanding what you're saying is that you would probably lean more in the direction of the other ones because of the lower risk factor. In a general sense, like you can control it a little bit better. The altitude drops. This is what I read or had learned, was that with the altitude drops, they stopped at 10 feet because it's for psychological reasons. Obviously, they said the athlete would get scared at around 8 feet, and he would, no longer be interested in doing it anyway.
No. I mean, how often are you going to do this? Twice a week or 3 times a week? And how many jumps are you going to make of this? Because there's a thin threshold between having a very good training effect and, say, the adaptation zone and the destruction zone.
Yeah, right. It's
and with drop jumps, if you don't figure out, and it only shows after a couple of months or a couple of years. And since I work for athletes for years at a time, I'm very careful with it. If I only got an athlete now, I'm going to coach him for 2 months, or he's 36 years old, nothing to lose, well, just experiment and try. But I value my athletes too much and their performances for destroying them in a way of doing very, let's say, brutal training method. Like most people like that. I don't like it.
Yeah.
And I'm not soft, believe me. Ask my athletes, I'm not soft, but I don't like to destroy them.
Well, I mean, it ultimately, like we were talking about earlier, the end result in the long term is what matters. So if you're risking that, then it doesn't make sense when you have other tools that will effectively get the job done. So the message is that you lean towards the other one because of the lower risk factor and other things involved.
Yep.
You're getting the same job done in a general sense. Yep. Now, go ahead. You were saying something about the or more about that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, if I have a training method, which gives me 100% improvement, but there's a 30% chance of injury, then I prefer a training method where there's an 80% improvement and a 5 or 10% risk of injury. Because in the long term, that's what's going to count for the athlete. Yeah.
Now, one last question that's kind of, you alluded to it, and it was actually something that was on my mind. Some of the methods that you see, I think Dr. Bereshansky might have talked about it more than I've seen anybody else talk about it, with contrast training with like weight releases, coming down with an eccentric load and then coming back up with a lighter concentric load in the same, so the weight releases fall off at the bottom of the range of motion, and then you come back up. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the devices. They hang on the side of the barbell. And I think Louis Simmons kind of popularized that a little bit in the United States a little bit. Is that what you would consider like, okay, now this mimics the transition from the eccentric to the concentric in a way that makes sense? A smooth flow between the two.
Yeah, the Russians had more of those equipment. For instance, also a thing with springs. So you push and push and push isometrically, and all of a sudden, if you go a little bit over, then it releases and poof, it just goes all the way up. They have all kinds of equipment to kind of do that. And the question is it better than performing your competition movement? Let me say that, because that's of course the most specific ones. So here's the problem: if it is a very general exercise, we're looking at transfer. We're looking at transfer loss. It doesn't. There's no 100% transfer from, say, bench press to shot put. So you can be very strong in bench press, but does it really translate in improvement in shop? Now you have a problem of specific training. Well, if the training becomes very specific, then you might as well train outside, not in the weight room, outside, or do competition, because that's probably better than going to the weight room and trying to imitate something or getting close to some movement that is easy to do. Well, you can imitate running in the weight room very well, but why don't you run on the track on spikes with somebody else against somebody else? And nothing comes closer than that.
Right. So you alluded to also, that you're looking at the weighted clothing, especially I think the weighted shorts, and then some of the other ones for the lower limbs more recently. And once again, I think that was an idea that originated in Russia. I know, I see, some of the earlier writings like of Dr. Vershansky talked about it a bit, maybe back in the 80s. And Dr. Yes here talked about it as well. Kind of be the heavier, lighter version for sprinters, maybe, or team sports, kind of that same concept.
Yeah.
Talk about that, like what you're looking at right now with that, because I think it's very interesting.
Let me see. What I do now is I'm 1 second. I'm looking for something now. What we experiment with right now is this the wearable resistance, which I think is very interesting. And wearable resistance has two forms. It's a classic hypergravity training, which is wearing a weight vest around your waist for a couple of hours a day, generally around 3 weeks, not training with it, not sleeping with it, but the rest of the day you have this weight vest on. But the thing with the weight vest is that the dispersion of the weight is not very well. It's also centered around the center of mass, which isn't too bad. But for a tennis player, for instance, you want also to load the arms. For a sprinter, you want to load the legs. So now we use wearable resistance, which is probably the most specific form of training there is, and it works. I do a lot of experiments with it to see how far we can get in the coming weeks and months. I'm going to do a lot of EMG measurements to see what the difference is with, let me say, sprinting of jumping. Let me see if I can find something here. I have something here. A little. Can you see a movie? Not yet, huh?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, here we go. It's this one. Have you seen this one? It's the weights here. Yeah.
I don't think
you put the small weights here on the sleeve of the arm. Yeah. Here on the hamstrings and on the calf muscles. So see, you see the weights here. The weights here on the lower arm, on the front and on the back, hamstrings and quads, and on the calf, but you can see them here. Okay, running on the treadmill, just to control. Okay, the weights, running on the treadmill, jumping. You see the weights? No, it's hard to see them. You see them on the quads here.
Yeah.
I have the little films here as well. So, but running on the treadmill. Here you go. There's a non-motorized treadmill. You think, oh, she's running slow. No, it's non-motorized. There's no. She has to do it all by herself. 10 seconds full speed with the weights. And believe me, this is pretty heavy. It doesn't look heavy, but it is. Bounding. You see the bounding with the.
Right.
Yeah. And of course, in the end, you'll see the sprinting here on the track. It's hard to see the weights, I realize that, but believe me, it's there. You can see it here, for instance, and on the calf you see it. And believe me, this is very, very, very heavy, even if the weights are light, because it's the leverage making it heavy. A light weight here doesn't mean anything. If you extend your arm, the same weight becomes much heavier. So it's the leverage that makes it heavy. And of course, the velocity. If you make it too heavy, you look like a Robocop or Terminator. You don't move anywhere. But you still need to be. You still saw her bounding. You still saw her sprinting.
Right.
You couldn't see that she wasn't sprinting full speed. She isn't because she has this weight to carry around. But if you're only with electric timing, you can measure that she's slower than without the weight. And then you could do as a kind of an activation process. You could then take the weights off and make a sprint without.
So how would you number one, a couple of rules of thumb that I think that are interesting for people to know. The loading pattern or placement of the weights, from what I had understood, let's say, for example, the thigh would be they would wrap all the way around the thigh, and they would be distal from the joints. You wouldn't want them near the knees. You would want them up a little higher, closer, maybe a little bit closer to the hips.
Exactly.
And they would wrap around the thigh, correct?
Yeah. Of course, when you want to do something for the psoas muscles, then it's obviously that it's closer to the groin, it's lighter, and closer to the knee, more distal, it's heavier because of the leverage. So it's your choice to do that, depending on, of course, the what you want to accomplish with the athlete, and also the strength levels of the athlete. So with young athletes, I do it almost halfway. With older accomplished athletes like this one, I can go all the way down to the knee if the psoas muscle. But it's only 50 or 100 or 200 grams. It's almost nothing. It's like people say, oh, as a coach, you stick it onto it. Well, this is not going to do much, you know. This is so light.
Yeah.
You sprint and you ask, how was it? Says, whoa, this was heavy, man. And we can see it because it's still sprinting or still bounding.
What would you say is the typical loading pattern? I'm sorry, not pattern, but like the way that you would load the weights. Like, you know, with somebody who is a higher level athlete, is it more of a percentage of the difference in times that are achieved with the weights? Like, are you trying to stay within a time frame, or are you more looking at technique not changing much? Is that because that, like Zetziorski, I think, has spoken about it that I've read, and Dr. Yes has talked about it quite a bit. He said mainly what you're trying to do is make sure you don't change technique much at all.
Exactly. Well, you could see it. You know, if I wouldn't have told you she was wearing the weights, you couldn't see it. So you would still think, yeah, she's bounding or she's starting from the blocks. You couldn't just see it. The moment you start to see it, you're probably already too late, because then the contact time becomes too long, and the whole dynamics and also the kinematics of the sprinting or the bounding just changes too much. Well, then it's better to do squats or leg press or whatever. You know, if it changes that much,
right.
Well, then the weight is too light to make it really to get an increase in strength. So you're looking for the best of both worlds here, and this is the closest you can get to, I think, specific training. You can do anything with it. You can swim with it. You can play basketball with it. You can play tennis with it on the lower arm or the upper arm or on the body, whatever you want to do. So this is the versatility of the system.
And the key, and the key being in team sports is you'd go play.
Yeah.
Nothing. You know, there's no special formula. You go out and play, and then maybe at halfway through the play, you take it off, and you get a little contrast.
Exactly, and also for endurance, of course, because it will have a higher demand on your energy systems as well. You know, the electric system, probably the electric system as well, because you're demanding more strength over a longer period of time, not only for 1 or 2 reps, but probably a whole sprint of 10 seconds full speed, or probably playing basketball for 10 minutes at a time with a load that is heavier. Yeah. So I'm going to figure that out in the coming months, as a matter of fact.
We're going to follow up on that with you, because I'm like I said, I'm interested to see what you guys find. What would just for people who are listening, what would be a general guideline, like, you know, additional weight being added? What would you say, like with the shorts that you showed? What is the upper limit that they even hold? Like, where, you know, this more than that would be too much.
I think about, let me see, about 2 kilograms.
It's about the max.
4 or 5 pounds.
Oh, 5 pounds.
And then things start to change. Depends where they are. The more distal they are, the more they cause changes. If it's more proximal to the joint or proximal to the center of the body, then the things don't change that much. So it's not only the weight that is the optimum, but it's also the placement of the weight, and of course what you want to accomplish as well. So if you want to,
and the degree of the athlete's proficiency, or like where he's at.
Yeah. Well, that's the art of coaching. It's not science. There's no really hard guidelines, and I doubt if there ever will be, because it depends what a coach wants to accomplish. Sometimes I want to have people running, doing anaerobic workouts, 300 meters for a 200-meter runner with this weight. So instead of having running to 3 times 300 meters, I'm running 2 times with the weights. Hey, much more intense, even if the weight is low, but it's more an endurance thing. So it all depends on what you want to accomplish. You can accomplish almost everything. You can get the raw strength by, stick the athlete full of all those equipment, and then it's like a weight vest almost, Then you wear 10 kilograms, start to look like a Robocop. But hey, if that's what you're looking for, then that's fine. If you're looking for table tennis, or if you're looking for tennis, you don't want to have an iron robot arm. You want to have a small change in there because the speeds are very high. You can also have a heavier tennis racket, but who wants a 10-pound tennis racket? I mean, it doesn't look like anything anymore,
Right. And I think that's the key for people to know, is that you're looking for subtle changes. You're not looking for dramatic ones.
It changes over time. It's not something that you do once a year. It's something that you do 2 or 3 times a week in a certain period. Preferably the specific training preparation period, not in general. In general, you do the raw things, the general strength, the maximum strength, and then when you come close to competition, so that's what you do.
Yeah, no, that makes
once 2 months or 6 weeks, and then 2 or 3 times a week you do something with it. Then you do the starting blocks with them, then you do the flying speed with them, then you do some tempo running with them. So that's it.
And you're not going crazy with the amount of volume. So with the weighted clothing, that for you, that's kind of like, is that newer for you? Like as far as like the athletes that you trained, before, that was not something you used with them as much?
No, the design is and the development of this equipment is really, really new. It's compression clothing. It's compression as well. It's pretty tight.
Yeah.
But also the fact that the weight is very light and not bulky. We used to use sandbags or little lead pellets or something, and it still was bulky like this thick. And now it's just 3-4 millimeters, and it still is heavy, and that's Velcro. So the new technology comes from the new fabrics and smarter fabrics and everything. That's where it comes from.
Where would you put this in the training with hypergravity training?
No, hypergravity you can use the weight vest. There's no problem, because hypergravity is more rougher than that, because you're wearing it 16 hours a day. So you sit, you walk, you stand, and then it weighs on your lower limbs.
Well, I meant as far as in the training process. Sorry.
Oh, this is after hypergravity. Hypergravity is more general, and this is more specific, because hypergravity is not connected to the competition movement. I wouldn't sprint with 13% of my body weight. I mean, your tendons start to, if you like your tendons still. So.
This is fits more in the overspeed section of training, kind of, or contrast area. Not quite overspeed, but kind of the same idea with with people who used to use the running chutes and let them go.
Yeah. So you can use it as contrast training as well. Then 2 sets without, 2 runs without, 2 runs with put the thing on, and then 2 runs without again to get a contrast as well. For the sensory motor system to tune it and learn. But you also have it in shot put, the shot put of the normal shot put, and then a lighter one and a heavier one. The Russians figured it out a long time ago, which is the best system to do. 1-2-1, light, normal, heavy. 1-2-1 or 1-1-1 or 2-1-1 or 1-1-2, whatever. So you can do the same thing with this vest.
And also the key there too is it would be used, like if you're in team sports, you would use this going into the preseason.
Yeah.
In practices. So if it was a basketball team, for example, everyone would have them on in practice, and then maybe halfway through the practice they would take them off, and then the rest of the practice would be without them on. Am I correct?
Exactly. You're strong already from the general preparation period, or the first preparation period already strong, and everything is okay. And now you're going to focus more on specific training forms. So that's
it's the highest degree of specificity that you could have in
Yeah, exactly.
Or in sprinting. I mean, it doesn't get any more specific. So here's a question that's interesting how do you foresee that being interplayed with? I know that you like a pulley system, or maybe if you're using a running sled, how would those interplay off of each other?
Well, as a matter of fact, running with the weights makes things a little bit heavier and a little bit slower.
Yeah.
Well, old speed is to make things faster than you can normally go. So one is more loaded training, which has more transfer to acceleration.
Yeah.
And the old speed has more a relationship, because the contact time is shorter, to maximum speed.
So the shorts would precede the pulley.
Yeah.
If you were using a running sled, where would the running sled interplay?
Probably the same. At the same time, basically, I think this one is better than the running sled, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
Because the running sled always pulls at your center of gravity. You see the thing bouncing up and down. It's too heavy, and it for instance, for your arms or something, it doesn't do anything. You get a good arm swing in, or your knee lift will suffer from that. So there's much more changes in running with a sled than there is in running with this, because you can disperse it nicely or evenly over all the limbs and all the body.
So you might see this replace.
Sorry?
So what you're saying is you might see this replace the sled.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah.
That's interesting. That would be like more of a dramatic change for you.
Well, not for me, but
I'm
will. Because people just got interested in the sled, after 30 years, people start, sled running, sled acceleration running, what weight should we use, lighter weights or heavier weights? All research is started right now, but that's the answer. The answer in the questions that we answered already 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So we step beyond it, and in 30 years from now, people will do research about wearable resistance.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's been around forever.
Sorry?
Because some of these concepts have been around for quite a while.
Well, most concepts have been around for quite a while, but it's just that nowadays, more than ever, especially sports scientists or coaches are become kind of narrow-minded as far as time frame. They don't look at the history. They don't read books of 30 years ago or 40 years ago. If you read the book of, I have a very nice book in which the Olympic 100-meter runner, Harold Abrams. He won the Olympics in 1924, I think. He writes a chapter about sprinting. Man, that was good. And most of the concepts after didn't add much to his concept of sprinting. Yeah, he had to dig a hole in the cinder track as a start. He didn't have starting blocks. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we have synthetic tracks right now, and something's changed, but the basic concept of sprinting is still there. It doesn't change very much. But people are, only living in the now. They don't look much into the future like before, and they pretty much they forget about the past or don't even bother to read things that have been invented 20 or 30 years ago. So time and time again, people start to reinvent the wheel or try to reinvent the gunpowder. It has been invented, guys. Don't surprise me with this stupidity, basically. Don't try to please me with your stupidity.
You have the same.
In a sense, you do, but it just makes me look real smart. So in a sense, you please me with your stupidity by saying, Henk, have you ever heard of super maximum training? You would hear videos of 40 years ago, now 1984, 85. Yeah, I've heard about it. I've heard about it. Oh, no, it's not. Read a book.
Absolutely, I love it. So now the other thing that we've touched on a couple times, it's going to be in the new book.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I think that you might have been the first person that I had talked to that had any good knowledge about it, and that was blood flow or restricted training or occlusion training, also known as Katsu. Now, I'm going to let me preface the question, and so that way that you can answer it most effectively. The context that you see mostly about is in bodybuilding. Like if you do some research on it, you Google it, you look on YouTube. It's almost exclusively contextually bodybuilding related, for the most part.
Yeah.
Explain to me and to everybody else what its context is to the athlete.
It's basically the same. What you do is basically it's a brain hack. What you do is trick the brain and giving it the feeling from the peripheral system, from the limbs, the peripheral circulation, the biochemistry, the formation of lactic acid in the muscle. You give the brain the idea there's some horrible workout going on, and that you need to recover from that. So you see a tremendous increase in growth hormone. You see hypertrophy. You see you can use it for rehab. You can use it for elderly people, for anti-aging. But in sports, also good that it's we use it for arms and legs, not only for the arms, not only for the legs. And here's the trick. Not we use katsu, the original idea from Japan, the very original idea. But not all blood flow or restrictive training or occlusion training is katsu. So you just take a rope, tie it around your biceps, and then, okay, now going to the bench press or biceps curls, and then, that doesn't work. You have to measure the amount of blood or the pressure before, and you have to know what pressure you have to go to. If you go too high, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. Your fingernails turn blue. It's not a very good idea. You might set yourself up for thrombosis. Not a very good idea. Right. So you have to be careful. It's blood flow moderation. It's not restricting it completely or cutting it off the blood flow. You have to restrict it to a certain amount. So you get a pooling of blood that comes into your arteries in the peripheral, in your arm or in your leg, and it gets out more slowly. So there's a little bit of pooling of blood in there. And there's also, when you move, a little bit, because people always tend to overdo it. They want to do bench press with it, heavy bench press with it as well. Well, if you do heavy bench press, you don't need a little wrap around your arm or rope around your arm or anything else, because there is already occlusion. It doesn't add anything. If you go over 40%, the effect is zero. If you go over 30-40% of your 1RM, the effect is zero. So the advantage is that you can get the effect of heavy training without heavy training. Now people think if I add it to heavy training, then it gets an extra effect. It just doesn't. It's just, again, limited thinking, let me say that. Limited thinking.
So what are if you're going to, let's say the athlete, or I'm sorry, the coach is looking at using katsu.
Yeah.
Because this is, as we know, you're going to, and this is a little bit of marketing piece on our part, Henk, and we normally aren't very good at this, but you're going to have to read the book for this because we can't go into every detail on this one. But if a coach looks at that and says, well, that's something they want to integrate into what they do, couple questions. When would they use it? And what kind of results should they expect?
Well, the good thing is there has been a trend for very specific, very limited applications of let's say, equipment. This one, just like the wearable resistance, is very versatile again. You can use it, number one, to enhance the training effect of hypertrophy or local endurance. For instance, sometimes, let me say, in surfing or windsurfing, you use the arms and your arms get, or in climbing, rock climbing or free climbing, your arms get very, very heavy. Or in rowing, lower arms get very heavy. Well, because of the little bit of occlusion there, you can train that better with katsu. But also, you can use it, you can swim with it, you can, so you can use it very specifically again, just like the wearable resistance. This is the cool thing. You can play basketball with it, you can row with it, you can swim with it, you can run with it, you can do anything, play soccer or baseball with it, you can do anything with it. And it's not only the people make a mistake, say, well, it's only for the arms, it's not for the arms. Because it's a systemic effect. It's a systemic effect, so it works on all muscles, not only on the arms. It also, the effect goes through the brain, and the brain doesn't really matter, it makes everything. You can also use it for recovery, to recover. You can also use it as a kind of a warming up. You can test, for instance, explosive strength, then you do the katsu, and then you do explosive strength again and measure the jumping height. You'll see you jump higher. How? Well, again, probably because we think that you also recruit fast fibers rather selectively. Because the fast fiber is probably is better in handling lactic acid. It produces lactic acid, but it's better. It produces it a little bit later, but it's better in handling lactic acid because of the LDH enzymes. So fast fibers have LDH5 and slow fibers more LDH1. Okay. So lactic acid, the anaerobic metabolism, is the bread and butter of the fast fiber, not of the slow fiber. So the slow fibers will drop out because they can't handle lactic acid, while the fast fibers will maintain. Let me say that's the better explanation, basically.
So, yeah, so for everybody, you're going to read the book because there's more, obviously, there's more to talk about with this, and
yeah,
we're not going to give it all away. But it's something that you're looking at integrating into the training with your sprinters as a tool to help enhance the process. And I would dare say 90+% of anybody who's listening has never heard of Katsu or doesn't know much about it. So this is going to be like a new idea. The book will definitely hold the only real good, new, relevant information for athletes in the U.S. in the English language. So this is something everybody's going to have to be looking out for when the book is ready.
Yeah, and there's more, so there's no problem.
Oh yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to read it.
Well, I'm excited writing it on a daily basis, so that's good too. With all the bibliography and the pictures in there how we use it and everything. So that's fine. No, I wouldn't do. I can immediately hear the question: what if you combine wearable resistance and Katsu? Don't. I want to say, just don't. And eccentric, eccentric training with Katsu and wearable resistance.
Or vibration. I just thought of this. I could see somebody saying vibration and Katsu together.
Exactly.
Having the opposite effect on the body.
Exactly. So that's why not? It's like uphill running with somebody on your shoulders and then a sled and also wearable resistance.
Right.
It's too much.
Dr. Yes has always told me, because that was when I was younger, especially. He said, "Don't combine anything." He said, "If a concept is a good concept, leave it where it's at and use it for what it's for." He said, "As soon as you start combining stuff, you're going to create a disaster, either injury or no training effect."
It's a very simple. People have problem setting priorities and making choices. So what they do, they have a plate and they go there and put on there some spring rolls, Chinese spring rolls, and a slice of pizza and a steak and some cake on there with whipped cream. How does it taste on one plate? And it's all delicious food. It's all delicious food. I love spring rolls. I like pizza. I like cake with whipped cream, but not on the same plate. So don't try to combine them. It tastes like crap. So, eat your spring rolls with a Chinese meal, perfect. And then next day you eat a whole pizza, perfect. But not try to combine everything and then, combine all colors. You get a beautiful color, you get a gray or brownish color. It just doesn't make sense. Why are people not smart enough to apply this to sports? I have no idea.
Part of it's an American thing. We've always got to take everything to the extreme level. We're never happy, but something just being a good concept, letting it be what it is. We've always got to make it better, or bigger, which actually leads into to one of the last questions.
Yeah.
So isometrics, you see a lot of people talking about this now, these extended long ones, 30 seconds. Jeff, I want you to jump in on this too. For multiple minutes. Jeff, go ahead and jump in on this, please, and articulate this question.
I just think isometrics, they're becoming hugely popular due to the work of Franz Bosch talking about isometrics. But you'll see people now doing isometrics for 2 minutes, 5 minutes.
Why not 2 hours?
I don't know. I don't know enough about isometric training, I guess, to know where is too much and things like that. And I don't really, I guess, fully understand the argument for the, like, for instance, for the longer durations, the 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 minute ones. I think it's supposed to be for aerobic training, is what I've read, but I haven't looked too much into it. So just kind of curious your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, the principle of isometrics, first of all, comes from the US in the 1960s, and then the real research has been done by Hettinger. He wrote a book, Isometric Training, the Germans. A lot of research about angles, about times, about repetitions, everything he covered. So the book is very, very good. If you would start with isometric, read it. Okay. Well, what's why would you ever do it? Well, it depends on your sport. If you have a grip in, say, martial arts or judo, you have to hold somebody and strangle him. You need the isometric strength. In sprinting, okay. The only advantage I can see as well, you see the strongman competition where they have to hold a weight here isometrically for a longer time, a heavy weight in front of them for a longer time. So, okay. You get some isometrics because you get blood flow restriction. That's number one. Number two, what it would do, in theory, is that is a good way to strengthen your tendons and your fascia. Because the length will stay the same between the two insertions, and the muscle contracts, so it becomes shorter. So there's more strain on the tendons and the fascia. So it's kind of training for that. But for me, it's very secondary training. It's not specific. It's not general. If you gain strength, it's always angle dependent. So if you do isometric strength for your arms and your biceps at a 90-degree angle, you get strong in the 90-degree angle, but not in a 10-degree angle or a 160-degree angle. So it's very angle dependent. Aerobic. Why don't you do aerobics? Even aerobics class is better for your aerobic capacity than isometrics. I mean, you're only using a few muscles at the same time, normally. Unless you do isometric leg press or isometric squat or something, you use more muscles. But then for aerobics, it just doesn't make sense at all. It just doesn't make sense at all. You do anaerobics, of course. That's what you do because you close the blood vessels, because the muscle contraction closes the circulation. So you get blood flow restrictive training. But nothing to do with aerobics. You don't see an increase in heart rate if you do, because you get a Valsalva maneuver. So you just close, you're squeezing, and that increases your pressure and blood pressure and put pressure on the heart. Is that what you're looking for? Well, do it. Is that what you're looking for? Do it. I can't see any sense in it. It used to be in the 1960s because it was cheap. You didn't need anything. Yeah. Your dad could get stronger by standing in the doorpost and just pushing in both hands, so or lifting a very heavy table. That's it. You don't do anything.
Okay. So, what I've read, and you correct me if I'm wrong, the upper limit on most isometric contractions that are useful is about 6 seconds, is what Dr. Vereshchinsky pointed out. And others have. Is that about right?
Exactly. Because it's obvious that there's an inverse relationship between your recruiting muscle fibers and the duration. You cannot hold it 100%. The drive from your brain is not 100%. Say, okay, you hold this for 60 seconds. Then you're not going on the first second. It's impossible. The drive is lower. I tested it already a long time ago for something else. There's no drive. You say you hold this for 4 seconds, squeeze as hard as you can. You go really hard. But if you do this for 1 minute or leave alone 2 minutes, it's just ridiculous because you go sub-maximum all the time. There's no maximum recruitment.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So, I'd always known that, and Jeff kind of brought it to my attention that there was other ideas out there on it, and I said, I can't think of any reason. It doesn't make any, I could see it being maybe injury, creating injuries, but that's about it.
For me, there's 3 things that I need to, when I want to apply this. Number 1 is logic. Does it sound logical? But sometimes things go against my logical thinking. So I say things you don't expect. But number 2, there's research, and number 3, practical experience from other people who figured it out already 40 years ago, like isometric training, or 60 years ago already isometric training, and then your own experience of people around you say, hey, this is great, and what did you do? Okay, did this? Okay, let's try and do it. If there's no logic, if there's no theory, if there's no practice, just a website or a blog where people have claimed great results, forget about it. I'm not going to use it.
Yeah, in general rule of thumb is exactly what Henk said. follow that, and you'll stay out of trouble.
Yeah.
Now, the last question that we have for you today is, and this always has interested me. Like, I always wonder what's on the mind of an expert. Like, what do they want to know about? And I thought this would be an interesting question. When you're thinking about the training and you're kind of going through information, is what question or questions are the ones that are dogging you that you'd like to know the answer to, like you're not sure about yet, and you're kind of experimenting with? Where's your curiosity at right now, Henk?
Well, I'm not sure about anything. This is the problem. My problem. I'm not sure about a lot of things. There's more things I am not sure about than the things I'm absolutely sure about. And that drives you to keep thinking about it and to tinker with it and to think about new developments all the time. The thing that I really want is the difference between genetic potential and epigenetic development, how that is. Are things really controlled by your genes, or we can develop it? Yes, we know. To what extent? To what extent can we develop it? And where can we find it? And are there different ways to develop so-called genetic traits? Are the people already tinkering with genetic manipulation? Well, I think there are people already did things in sports to improve performance with genetic manipulation. As a matter of fact, I am 100% sure they did. I'm going to talk with one of these experts next week. So to see, okay, what's going to be a next revolution or a next development in this case? And that's hard because there's nothing you can see. You can't see it under a microscope. You need expensive equipment in order to see all those things. So we take DNA tests for the last 2 years and see what's in the DNA already. Okay. Most of the time it's kind of disappointing. It's only a confirmation what you already know. Yeah. Guess what? There's a guy who ran the 100 meter in 10 seconds. 10 years after, you take his DNA and say, oh, wow, you got fast muscles. You have a genetic potential for fast muscles. Well, what a surprise. I already knew that, didn't I? So, more things. You ask a marathon runner, and so on and so on. So more than the time, it's a confirmation and anything else. But I want to go a little bit deeper about what are the ways to tinker with ion channels, receptors, things like this. What is the whole world to develop? We don't know anything about it. One of the latest things I ran into was ATPase. Everybody thinks about ATP. What about ATPase? So that's and what about, even more important, ATP synthase? So where does ATP come from? Where it's synthesized? Take a look at it. ATP synthase. That's an interesting little thing there. And it's a miracle. ATP synthase is really a miracle. You start to dive into that. So how does the body make ATP? ATP synthase, as the name tells you.
It just got deep.
That's a little machine that a little, basically a cylinder that works 600 times per second, the high frequency. That's pretty fast. Pumping out ATP. That's an interesting one. Think about it.
It is interesting. We'd had this discussion, Rick Bruner and I had the discussion on, nutrigenomics, how nutrition would play the role in that. And he's been in contact with some of the people. I think it's in St. Petersburg. They have a genetic lab as it relates to sports.
Yeah, I know. It's very good.
Yeah. You know what I'm talking about. And so he'd been in communication with him. He would keep me in on the conversation a little bit. And it's fascinating because they're still identifying what makes Usain Bolt on a genetic level. They don't know. We know some things, but we don't know all of them. We know, and matter of fact, we probably know less than we know. Like, there's way more information to know than there's what's known. We're really on the infantile stages of that. And but what was interesting to me was what Rick said. He said a lot of nutrition, things that your diet and things like this, supplementation can actually turn a gene on or off. You might have a gene, but if it's not turned on, it's not being expressed, so it doesn't matter. So you're talking about turning a gene off, maybe, possibly, with nutrition. That's a negative one. And turning one on that might be a positive one.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And then also, you correct me if I'm wrong, Hank. Somebody who's trained a certain way, and I think you made allusion to this with one of the German throwers, that a guy who wasn't genetically gifted. You looked at the end of his career though, and he had a biopsy that looked of a guy who's genetic freak.
Yeah, exactly.
And presumably, there's going to be an effect on that. If for him having kids, his children would see some of the effect of the training. I would have to assume, because your kids would see the effect of other things. If you smoked while you were pregnant, or before, your kids could see some of the effects of that. And I would assume that training would be the same way over the long term. Maybe not in one generation, but multiple generations, you would start to see a genetic trait develop.
Absolutely. Yeah. In Holland, we have a famous example of in 1944, during the Second World War, we had the hunger winter, where people were suffering. There's no longer food, and people went to the countryside to find a potato or something. So they were suffering. And then you look at the children of the mothers that lived during that time, and you see a tremendous difference with children who were born later or earlier or didn't suffer from that period. You see difference in body composition, everything. So you see it's transferred to the next generation. All these things are transferred to the next generation by genes. In a very short period of time. It doesn't take 100,000 of years. It takes only one generation and it's already transferred.
You're starting to see it. Yeah, you start to see an effect at a real early stage. That's really amazing. To me, it's absolutely fascinating that you could start to see that change. So, and to come back to your earlier point before we sign off, the question that's always, because people will ask me when I'm training a kid who's, let's say, 12 years old, and they'll say, well, how good do you think he can get? And my response is always, no idea. I know that he can be really, really good.
Yeah.
If we've got 10 years, we got a lot of time.
Yeah.
But it's kind of scary. I don't know how good they can be because I'm starting to see a result with kids that's way better than I would have expected.
Yeah.
And I think our expectation was what a genetic upper limit was. I think that sign or that post has been moved out now. Yeah. What's possible now is much better than what was possible in 1980s.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they say, well, I always kind of shirk at this comment. People will say, well, this is somebody's genetic potential, but that's going to change.
Well,
if we get smarter, theoretically, right? Because the genetic potential is limited by how smart you are.
Well, also genes change over time. If you have identical twins, then you will see that genes change from each other. They start with the same genes, and after time, the genes change. Not the epigenetic changes, but the genes itself, they change. That's something that wasn't very well known. And as a coach, you have probably the most, because as a coach, you take all factors into account, and a genetic take only a couple of genes that he knows about into account, because there's many more genes that are involved in, say, muscle and tissue than the 5 or 10 we differentiate now. There's many, many more involved because there's many more proteins in the muscle. It's not only troponin, actin, myosin, there's many more. So they must play a role as well, what we didn't recover. So they have genes as well, and multiple genes that control every protein. So that's number one. I only know maybe 5 or 10% of what we will know in 10 years. But it doesn't mean we're not going to use that 5%. We have 5% more than we had 20 years ago. So let's use that 5% that we know with a certain reserve, not going into the wrong direction here. And as a coach, you probably know more than the biomechanics, because the biomechanics expert or the exercise field can say it. He only looks at one factor, and we look at multiple factors to see the potential of an athlete, not only genetic or mental or biomechanical or physiological factors. So that's why we coach have a better shot at describing the potential of an athlete, a young athlete, than anyone else has.
Yeah, it's that's what makes this fun to me, is not knowing what the result's going to be. If I thought I could predict really well, then it wouldn't be any fun.
No, that's true. There's always an X factor. Thank God, there's always an X factor that, well, things don't turn out the way you expected. But I try to make that X factor as small as possible. You ask me, how do you know the athletes won? I don't know. I don't know. The moment I know 100% that they're going to win, or that preferably they're going to win, I'll quit. Because then I did my job very well. Then I can quit, and I can exactly predict if they're going to win today or not.
You can move on to something else.
Yeah, something else.
So something else that you figured out.
Yeah.
I agree. Well, hey, we got to get back together again before it's a year and a half, Hank. So we're gonna make a point.
Yeah, okay.
And after I know you guys are gonna be gone for a while, but when you get back, we're gonna try to get together. And
okay.
As far as the status of the book for everybody, do we feel safe saying sometime this year we'll be ready?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Because I promised, I pushed the other guys as well, and now they're pushing me. But I only have one chapter, so it's easy to push me, and then I do the other chapter. They want to Henk, are you okay?
They want you to get the show on the road now, right?
Sure. No, preferably before summer somewhere.
Okay.
The most time is not the writing. The most time is just, I think, the bibliography and all the articles and books and all the photos and everything.
It's not the fun part.
It's kind of easy. You sit behind your laptop and just write, and that's about it. And it has to be edited, and Firen's going to edit it a little bit as well. So yeah.
Yeah, sure. All right.
Well,
Well, hopefully, maybe by the end of the summer, we'll be ready to go, and maybe by the Central Virginia seminar, we'll have that ready for people. So we're excited for that. Well, thanks a lot, Hank. I'm so glad that we got a chance to catch up again, and we'll be talking soon in the next month or two.
Okay, perfect. Okay, gentlemen, thanks for your time as well.